quickly start off by again thanking everybody for coming. I know that you all have lots of things to do on Saturday mornings, so thanks for joining us. This is the second in our series of these workshops via Zoom. As you know, we have a program, Eastside Pollinator Garden Project, that was funded by Metabolic Studio, and we started it with strong advisory help with Inyo-Mono Master Gardeners, Eastern Sierra Audubon Society, and Bristlecone Chapter Native Plant Society, as well as some other key supporters. So we couldn't do this without them. And again, we're super grateful that Roberta is here today. She'll be our guest speaker that Marie will introduce in just a few moments. Just on the logistics of Zoom, it looks like everybody's got it now. I think everybody's on mute. Depending, we'll either unmute everybody. Definitely if you've got questions, raise your hand or post them on chat, but we'll, Cheryl, we're glad you're here too. I just saw her note. And so that's a great example of chat. Cheryl posted something on chat and we can respond to it right there. So I just first of all want to say I hope that you and all of your families, hi Lorraine, are doing well. And we know that our first responders out on the line are key to our safety and our health. And I just joined, I'm sure, with everybody to thank everyone. And if you've got people in your family, please let them know how appreciative we are. Personally, there was a small fire. I live out here in 40 acres, and there was a fire out here last Saturday, and it was very, very scary. There was black smoke everywhere, and there were 7 or 8 fire trucks that showed up, and our whole community is incredibly grateful because who knows what could have happened had they not been so diligent. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear my German Shepherd, but he just decided to bark a lot. So I think we've got everything going on. I think everybody knows about ESLT. I just want to say, if you've got any questions, feel free to reach out to me or call me, email me, and I'll be glad to answer questions. Right now, I'd like to just turn it over to Marie. And as many of you know, Marie is our 2nd year AmeriCorps member. Our AmeriCorps members stay with us. Normal term is about 10 and a half months. And Marie chose to stay a 2nd year, which was just incredible. And we had so many exciting, great plans for her 2nd year of AmeriCorps. And guess what? We do have some new plans, but it isn't quite what we thought. So Marie has just been doing an amazing job of turning things over to these webinars. And I want to thank Metabolic Studios again. They are funding this program for us again this year and helping us with the technology and the switch. So kudos to Marie for doing a great job of turning this over into virtual instead of in person. And I'm going to turn it over to her now to take the next step. And again, if you've got any questions, feel free to let me know. And I'm going to go on mute for a minute because we've got a couple people emailing me trying to get in. They can't. So let me know if you need anything. I'm going to just do some problem solving for a minute. Thanks, Mary.
Awesome. Thanks, Kay. It's great to see all of you here. So many familiar faces and people I don't necessarily know. Just a little bit about our Eastside Pollinator Garden Project, for those of you who might not be familiar. We work with community members like all of you to help certify gardens as pollinator friendly. And that's usually involves an initial garden visit where we just where I'd come check out your garden, or this year we're doing virtual visits. And then a check-in visit where we look to see if you've met all the criteria for it. And then if you've met the criteria, you'd get a voucher to California Native Plant Society's fall sale for native plants. And then after that, there's one final visit and you'd get a sign that says you have a certified pollinator garden. And one of the aspects of our pollinator gardens is we have 2 water features. One is a water feature like a bird bath or an irrigation ditch, and then the other is a water conservation measure. And so that is why today's workshop on installing drip irrigation is so important. And as Kay mentioned, our guest speaker today is Roberta. And Roberta was a part of the 2009 Master Garden class, is that?
Yes.
Yeah. And has been a part of our pollinator garden project since the beginning, has a gorgeous garden, which you can actually see behind her, and has done amazing work for ESLT and is one of our great volunteers, and most importantly, is a local expert on drip irrigation. So that being said, I will turn it over to you, Roberta, and let you get started.
Great, thanks. Thank you all for coming today. I think this is interesting to do this via Zoom because my friend Barbara Turner, who is the one who introduced me to drip irrigation, can attend. She lives over in Davis now, so she wouldn't necessarily get over here. So thank you, Barbara, for getting me started on this road. I have a PowerPoint, and I think we'll go through the PowerPoint, and then I'll come back on the screen and we can do questions if that works for everybody. So I'm gonna share my screen. It should be this one. Okay. Okay. So I'm gonna do one more thing because this distracts me. Okay, so as Marie said, I was in the original Master Gardener class of 2009. And as I said, Barbara introduced me to drip irrigation back in Stockton. Pete and I would come over here to go on vacation, and when I come home, all my plants were dead. And Barbara said, gee, there's no reason for that to happen. You could have drip irrigation on a timer. And we did that in Stockton, and our garden became fantastic. This is a photograph of my drip box with all my things in it, except for the tubing. So you can see the emitters, the punchers, the connectors. Kind of a mess. So there's a lot of reasons to use drip irrigation. It conserves water because it puts the water directly on the plant, and because it's laying on the ground, usually there's no evaporation, and you can get right to the root system on plants. It's a system that's easy to add to or subtract to. It concentrates water on the plants. Plants of different watering needs can be grouped together, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And it can be changed as your garden needs change. I've added bird and animal watering stations along my drip lines. So that's a way to make sure your bird bath gets water every time your irrigation system goes on. And if you're like me, you get a garden and there's places in the garden you'd like to plant, but there's no irrigation system going out there. And since this is flexible tubing, you can run the water through that tubing out to those remote parts of the garden without doing digging or buying PVC pipe. And that lets you expand your gardening area. The supplies are readily available, even in Bishop, and you don't have to do it all at once. There are some disadvantages. You need to check it monthly. For example, this year, I've had a lot of issues that I've had to repair, but they're all fixed now. You need to winterize it, although it's relatively simple, and half the time I don't winterize it and I don't have problems. Sometimes the emitters can be clogged or they can break. Sometimes animals chew on the line. And probably the most aggravating problem is other people gardening in the yard may damage these lines because they don't know where they are. Although I have to say, I did that myself this morning and I knew where the line was. This is my drip board that if you've come in the past in person, you get to see it, but obviously we don't get to do that today. So I took pictures of it for everybody. So when you start a project, there's a few things you need. You need scissors or other cutters to cut through the tubing. You need a punch for the mainline tubing. You need goof plugs, plumber's tape, mainline tubing, which is the big tubing, spaghetti tubing, which is the little tubing, and you need your emitters and sprayers, and you need closers for the mainline tubing. It's nice to have these in a bucket, or you could see mine was a tackle box. I got it shields. Gloves are nice, knee pads, water, sunscreen, hat, maybe an assistant. And I like to have a pair of channel lock pliers because some things I can't tighten as well with my hands as they need to be tightened. So here's the scissors, the channel lock pliers. These are two styles of punches for the mainline tubing. These are goof plugs, and they have two different sizes depending on what size hole you've made. Normally you're using the smaller size, and this is just regular plumber's tape. I like to use that on all the threaded fittings because it makes up for the fact that maybe I don't tighten them quite enough. It's nice to have a plan of what you're going to do, and this is a plan for a vegetable garden I took out of a catalog. But usually you're just going to lay your tubing where your plants are. If you're retrofitting and if you're starting new, you can lay the drip first and plant the plants around the drip. Or you can do a combination. So if you have an existing watering system, which if you've bought a pre-existing house, you probably do. You probably have sprinklers or rainbirds, things like that. You can buy caps for certain sprinkler types, which is primarily the rainbird sprinklers that are probably about 3 inches round, 2.5 inches round. Pop-ups can be easily converted with a variety of parts. But if you have oscillating rainbow type sprinklers, they're going to have to be dug up and retrofitted, and they're at least a foot deep. So that's unfortunately a hard job. And at my house, all the sprinklers were put in the corners and they poured cement around them. So I also had to crack out cement. Hopefully you won't have that kind of problem. So this is an example of a cap, and I've punched a hole through it to attach it to the board. But you just screw off the rainbird sprinkler and screw this cap back on. And these have been in our yard for at least 12 years and they've been fine. In fact, most of them are covered up with dirt at this point. If you have pop-up sprinklers, you can unscrew them and then screw this system back on the top of it. This screws into the riser. You may need some step down parts to make it fit, but this is really the simplest. This also comes in an L shape and a straight up and down one, and I'll show you those. So here's one where I have the hose going in both directions, and here's an L-shaped one because I have concrete over here and the garden bed is over here. These are very nice to use. And sometimes you want to leave your pop-up sprinklers, but maybe you want to run some tubing to a specific plant, or you want to water a bird bath, something like that. Maybe you want to run the micro tubing into your compost pile. So you screw off the sprinkler head, screw this part on to the riser, and then you attach your micro tubing right here. And this is pretty handy. I've used these for bird baths. And then here's another system, which at my house doesn't work too well because there's so much gunk in our water. But again, you screw this on top of the sprinkler riser, replacing the riser. And this particular model lets you put 4 spaghetti tubings on and you run them to your plants. I've seen them with 8, 12. I personally think it's easier to use that first system and punch holes for micro tubing for all the individual plants. But in Bishop or someplace like where Kay lives, the water has less gunk in it, this might work just fine. And I have used these, but after a few years, I had to replace them. Another thing about drip irrigation, it is flexible. This is an example in our yard where I have a sprinkler riser and you see it's all attached to sprinkler, but occasionally I need this area to be dry. So I unscrew this and I put the L-shaped connector on and attach the large tubing, and then I have a dry area. So that's kind of nice. Sometimes we put chickens back here and they don't want to be watered every 4 days. So to start out, you need to make a connection to your water source. You can connect to a faucet, you can connect to an automated sprinkler valve through the PVC pipe, or you can connect to a rain barrel, although this is a very slow system. But some people are capturing the water, and you have something you're watering that doesn't need consistent watering. So this would be a good system as well. And I'm sorry, this isn't a very good picture, but this is again like our TRL, and this is the PVC fitting attached at the factory to the tube fitting here. So this part would screw onto the PVC pipe, and this is where you put your mainline tubing. I like to use plumber's tape on those kind of connections. So anytime I'm attached to a faucet, a PVC pipe, a riser, or anytime a connection is more or less permanent. For me, that usually keeps drips from happening at those connections. I tend to under tighten or over tighten, so this keeps me in line. It's nice to have a timer on your system. That way you make sure the water is turned on and off when you want it to be done, and you make sure that you never leave the irrigation system running by forgetting to turn it off, or if you have to go to the store or whatever, it turns off automatically. And there's a couple of different ways you can do timers. If you're attached to a faucet, you can use this is more like an egg timer. It just turns the dial and then it shuts off. There are more that you can program with batteries, or this is a timer. Our house came with 13 sprinkler valves, so this is a real sprinkler valve timer that runs both my drip and our sprinklers. I have to give you a disclaimer. With the shelter in place order, I replaced this whole system because I had to replace a sprinkler valve that worked on our vegetable garden. So this is now on an automatic sprinkler valve with a timer because I had time. So there are 3 kinds of tubing. There is the mainline tubing, which is approximately a 1/2 inch in diameter. You use this to get the bulk of the water to the places in your yard. And there are at least 2 sizes out on the homeowner market. So what you want to do is select one size, and the easiest way to do that is to select a brand and stick with it. There are converters that let you connect the smaller tubing to the larger tubing, but that's sort of difficult to find sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't work very well. So wherever you start buying your mainline tubing, always buy that brand, or bring a sample with you if you're buying another brand and make sure that it is the same diameter. You can get mainline tubing with internal emitters, and there's different spacing on that. Most of the mainline tubing is black. There is brown, and I've seen green and white occasionally. There's also what's called tape, and that's sort of flat, and I'll show you that in some other forms available. The other type of tubing that lets you get the water to your plant is the spaghetti tubing. It's about 1/4 inch in diameter, and you use that to get water from the mainline tubing to the plants. There's soaker style spaghetti tubing. When I first started using that, it didn't work very well, but now it seems to work much better. I would get the kind that is slick and doesn't look like a soaker tube, because the soaker tubing ones tend to deteriorate in the water. There's not enough water pressure to push the water out through that tubing. And you can use this, as I said, to fill bird baths, dog bowls, chicken water buckets, dampen compost piles, etc. And then the third type of tubing is micro tubing, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So this is from the drip board, and here are, and obviously you can't see this very well, but here are two types of tubing. This one is slightly bigger in diameter. This is the 1/2-inch tubing. I like this the best. And this is, I think pretty much now everyone in Bishop probably has this size. Bishop Nursery used to have the smaller size, but I think everyone now has this. This is an example of a converter to attach this, the big tubing to the smaller tubing. Again, I try not to have to use a converter. And this is an end fitting. We'll talk about that a little bit later. This is a mainline tubing with an inline emitter, and you can see the water dripping out. This is actually from my yard. And a lot of times you'll get instructions on your packaging. So this is an example of inline emitters as well. So here's an example of the brown mainline tubing with the pre-installed emitters that's brown. You can also punch in emitters directly into the tubing. And with regular tubing, you don't necessarily have to use a spaghetti tubing. If your plant is right here, you could just punch in the emitter. Here's the spaghetti tubing soaker hose. The bulges are where the emitters are. And I live in Chalfont. My yard is not fenced from all the wild critters. So when I have a garden hose that is no longer usable, or occasionally I'll have mainline tubing that's screwed up, or I find discarded pipe at the dump. So if I'm running a long line of spaghetti tubing or even mainline tubing, I will encase it in something so when the animal starts chewing on it, hopefully they'll just destroy the outer case. The mainline tubing will not fit in old hoses unless you have a super fat one. So I would put that in pipe, but that's not necessarily necessary. I mean, if you have a dog on your property, you're probably not going to have to do that. It also protects against weed whacking if you're cutting down grass in your yard. So there's several ways to close off the mainline tubing. You can get a system like this that gives you a screw on and off cap. This is another way. It's got a cap on it, but I tend to prefer the figure eights because they're the easiest, and when I take them off for the winter, I can leave half of it on the tubing. Whereas this, you throw the cap on the ground, who knows where it's going to be 4 or 5 months from when you did that. I tend not to like carry them into the garage and store them. So you would slide your figure eight tubing onto the main line and push it down, and then you'd fold your mainline tubing and then pull the figure eight back up on it. And you push all the way up to the fold, and this works really well. If you're in a pinch, and sometimes these figure eights break, you can wrap wire, you can use duct tape, although duct tape will need to be replaced over time, but as long as you can get this fold really tight, that will stop the water at that point. So then we need to talk about fittings, and fittings come in straight, elbows or L's, T's, and X's. For the mainline tubing, there are two kinds. There's easy lock and compression fittings. Easy lock fittings are reusable. They seem to tolerate abuse and freezing better. I find them less likely to break or crack. I've only had 2 fail in 15 years out here. Once you know the trick, they're fairly easy to install, and you can get them with on and off valves. The other kind are compression fittings. They're not really reusable. I think they're more difficult to install, and I find they don't hold up to the weather or abuse as well. They seem to break. So this is an easy lock fitting. and this is a compression fitting. The Easy Lock fitting, you will slide the hose on and then screw this over it. For these, you just wiggle the hose into this till it can't go any further. And that's why it's hard to make it reusable. And I find this hard plastic it just doesn't weather as well. In Stockton, I had absolutely no problem with those, but here, not so much. So this one has a threaded end, so you can attach it to a hose or a faucet. Same here. And then here's for attaching to the mainline tubing. And you can see these are dirty. I've used them, taken them off, so they are reusable. So you can also get this with one more here in X. I think those are good for vegetable gardens, but not much else. And here's how to put an Easy Lock fitting on. Again, you screw this all the way to the middle, and then you take your hose and you rock it till it's in there, and then you turn this so it goes back over the hose. And I have one here. Maybe we can do a sample when we're back live on the screen. And here's one of the fittings with a on-off tab. So I use these in my vegetable garden. So if I have this bed and it's retired for a while or for the season, but I'm watering other things, I will turn this off, and then no water goes to this bed, but everything else can get watered. I like to use L fittings to make the angles so I can jog up and down the planting box. If you need to go underground, you can use those as well. And here's an L fitting, turning the corner. And then microtube fittings. They come in straight, elbows, and T's. And I believe there's X's, although I'm not positive about that. And here's the connector here that you would punch the hole in the mainline tubing and push that in, and here's an emitter. You can use stakes to hold the tubing in place at the base of the plant, or you can use a rock or a piece of wood. The tubing will soften in the heat, and then it will lay in place. And here's some other kinds of tubing tie downs, a wire U-shaped. This one you run the tubing through, and here's a trellis hanger. And there's a lot others out there. You can also use the holders for wire and things like that, depending on where you're doing your install. And then emitters. You need emitters. There's drippers, emitters on stakes, things called woodpeckers, Shrubblers, adjustable bubblers, microjets, pop-up risers, mini jets, downspray sprinklers, and misters. Usually you're either going to use a dripper or a bubbler. But there's all these different options out there. And if you go to the hardware stores in town, everybody has a little different collection of things, but they all have regular drippers. So here are the regular emitters, the green, and they're color coded except for this yellow guy. I got this at a yard sale. I don't know who made this. They don't have much water coming out of them. I use them in a place that doesn't need too much water, and so we won't really talk about them. And they're not standard because the color's not right. But standard color coding is green is 2 gallons per hour, black 1 gallon, red ½ gallon. I've seen orange at 5 gallons per hour. And here's examples of bubblers and shrubblers. And this part here screws left and right. You can take it all the way off for cleaning. But if you want a lot of water, you screw it till it's almost ready to come off. If you don't want as much, you tighten it. You have to be careful though, if you screw it to get a lot of water, sometimes you screw it too much and it won't stay on once the water goes on. And there are different styles. This allegedly is a self-cleaning one. And actually these are my favorite. They're hard. I don't find them to be available in Bishop, unfortunately, but that's just how it is. And here is a sprinkler stake, and I think I have this the wrong direction, but this will spray water out of it. And this is a mister that you can run a drip system on your patio, like they have in the malls in Las Vegas, and mist your patio so you can stay cooler. Here's an example of like a little sprayer. I have the micro tubing coming out here, my mainline tubing's back here, and it's spraying an area where the rainbirds don't hit my lawn. And here's T connectors going in both directions. As plants grow, they tend to need more water, so you can cut your line, add a T section, and add another length of tubing and another emitter. And here's an example of a misting set that you can get for your patio. I find, again, in Chalfont, the misters tend to get clogged with all the calcium we have in our water, and I have to replace them. So I don't use it too much, but when it's super hot, it's nice to have. And then there's flat tape for vegetable gardens. And this tape it has a different kind of connector to the mainline tubing, and it has a valve. And you can see it's flat, and it has evenly spaced areas where the water comes out, and it spreads the water in a nice circle. So if you plant your plant near the base or in between, depending on the plant, you get this nice circle of water that waters it. I kind of like these. They're a little bit easier to handle, but the end connectors are sort of difficult, although I see they've changed those, so those are probably better now. And then finally, there's something called microtubing. And this is what you see in the nurseries at Chalfont Big Trees. Bishop Nursery had these. There's these little skinny tubes. So they're like 1/8 of an inch, and they come out of the mainline tubing. And then they have this green thing that works as an emitter. And you put the tubing on one end and the water comes out, and then when you sell the plant or you don't need to water that plant anymore, you put it on the other end and it totally stops up the tube. So this is nice. I made myself a nursery area in my vegetable garden with things maybe I've dug up from the yard or things I've started from seed that aren't big enough to be planted in the ground yet. So I've used this system to keep these guys watered, and you just punch a hole in the mainline tubing, and then you just insert the microtubing into the mainline tubing for about 2 or 3 inches, always making sure to have it go towards the direction. The water's coming this way, and the microtubing has to go in this way. Oops, sorry. So this is kind of a nice system if you're a propagator. So I'm on my 2nd or 3rd year of this, and it's worked really well. And then you make adaptions with your drip. As I said, you can make animal water systems for bird baths, pets, chickens. I have drip going to my chicken waterer, so it gets watered every 3 or 4 days, depending on the time of year. You can make a muddy area for pollinators if you want by just running a hose, an emitter and a spaghetti tube to an area that can just be muddy. Butterflies like that a lot. And if you want to make a Santa Fe drain for trees, you can run an emitter into that. So here is an example of a bird bath. And again, this is the weed whacker protection thing. Because my husband goes out and weed whacks, which I really appreciate, but we often have disaster. So all my bird baths now are on drip tubing. So you can use a bubbler to wet a large area for leafy greens. Again, I think this would be great to make a muddy area too for butterflies. And then I mentioned the Santa Fe drain. You take PVC pipe, or you could take cardboard filled with gravel. You can buy made, professionally made ones that come out with plastic. Holes are punched in the side and the bottom is covered. And when you water, the water goes down to the hose and gets deep to the root system. I like to take my spaghetti tubing and just run it down there about that far. And then I've started to do that with all my new trees that I've planted, and they're doing much better. The book I first read about this indicates they pull this out of the ground after the tree is mature. If it's cardboard, it's just going to disintegrate. So again, that's a choice you can make. It's so dry in Chalfont, I've just left them in so far without any problem. And here's an example. This is a commercially made one, and this is one I made with old PVC pipe. I just run it in. This has a nice little cap for it. This book indicates it reduces plant mortality by 67%. So, but I've made them out of cardboard filled with gravel. You could make a chicken wire tube filled with gravel or rocks. They're kind of nice out here in the desert. So we talked about one of the disadvantages of drip is maintenance. So I'm going to start in the spring because that's where we are. So presumably you've had your water system turned off all winter. And in late winter and early spring, I start running my system, and I run it during daylight hours because of the frost potential. I run it at 4 in the morning and woken up to the winter wonderland, and that's not really a good use of the water and not so great for the plants. And by running it in the morning, it also allows me to check on the system and correct any problems and make any changes that might be needed, which might be improvements, additions, and so forth. I find spring is a good time to add lines, berry lines, so you don't see them, and it gets you outside to play in your garden. I generally, again, because of the frost potential, start watering at 7:30 or 8 and gradually step up the time to 5:45. Hopefully by this time of year, you're ready to start watering at a different time and you've gotten all your problems fixed. In summer, when we have consistently warm days and nights, and at my house, it's when the grass looks like it needs a little bit more water after watering, I change my run time to the middle of the night, about 12:15. And I do that for several reasons. I get more bang for my buck as the water goes further, as it's cool when it's applied and it doesn't evaporate. I'm not watering when the neighbors water, which if you're on a community water system might be important. In Stockton, when I watered, I had to water when none of my neighbors were watering because we didn't have enough water pressure. I don't hear the pump working when I water in the middle of the night. And I like to think all the animals that might chew my drip lines are asleep, although that's probably not true. However, you still need to do a monthly walk through the garden, looking for plants that might seem dry or have too much water, chewed spots, and fix those things. And occasionally you just need to add more water when we're having a bad heat wave. A common problem is the weed whacker damage right there. Again, I keep scraps of garbage basically. And so when I fixed this, I enclosed all this in a pipe because it was bound to happen again. In the fall, you need to continue your summer maintenance strategies, add or subtract lines, emitters, etc. If you have a plant that's growing, it needs more water, add more emitters. And again, as the temperatures start to drop, you need to consider changing your schedule again to water in the morning. And when it's time to stop watering, shut off your system, take inside any outdoor timers, and open the ends of the mainline tubing to drain. I like to make notes of any projects I might want to tackle. So 2 years ago, I buried only 2 or 3 inches all my mainline tubing in our front yard because the ground was so soft because we got so much rain that winter. And that was a project that was just on the back burner till the conditions were right. wasn't necessary, but it sure looks a lot nicer now. And in winter, you're probably going to need to water at least once a month. If we have a dry winter, I prioritize what I water: trees, major plants, and bushes. And an interesting note is if rain is predicted, it's good to try to water before it rains, because that allows the ground to soak up more water, because it's no longer bone dry. I usually just turn on my system, water for 2 or 3 days, and then turn it off till the next month. Remember though, if you're gonna water, to close up the ends before you water and then open them up again. So sources, all the ACE, the hardware stores in town, and Brown's on Highway 6, and well, I don't know what that street is, but you know, by the grocery outlet, they have drip irrigation stuff. Chalfont Big Trees. Chalfont Big Trees has the Easy Lock fittings. Brown has pipes, plumbing, that kind of stuff. True Value Hardware has drip as well. Sometimes I find drip stuff at yard sales. Just check it carefully to make sure it's truly usable. Dripworks and Willits has a great catalog. They'll send you one for free, or you can go online, do your research there, and then I think probably everything pretty much in the catalog is somewhere in town. Part of what happens with drip irrigation is you can't get everything at all one store, because each company makes a different set of components, and it works best to have a little bit of everything, but that's part of the fun. And then final thoughts. With decent water pressure, you can usually have 2 or 3 times the mainline tubing and emitters than the packaging says. Just experiment and keep checking. At our house, because we're on a well, we have really strong water pressure, and I have sprinklers and drip on the same valve line. Again, you can add or subtract emitters if plants die or plants get bigger. And just remember to check your system monthly, you know, look for things that seem out of place. But that gets you playing in your garden, and that's really quite fun. So thank you very much, and now we'll open it up to questions.
And if anyone has any questions for Roberta, feel free to either raise hands or unmute or type in the chat if you're comfortable with that.
That's Lorraine. Yes, Lorraine. Oh, can't hear you.
Okay. Now,
There you
can you hear me?
Yes.
I find that running the emitters during the middle of the day, that the water comes out so hot, you can't
Right.
even.
That's another reason not to run them during the day, because that can burn your plant's roots. So I like early morning. I mean, and I truly water at 12:15 in the morning. That's when I start all my cycles. I think that watering in the middle of the day, the water's going to come out like you had been boiling it. So I wouldn't do that. Is there a reason why you're picking the middle of the day?
Well, my setting says if you want to water twice in the day, you set it at this time, and then it will automatically water 4 hours later.
Oh.
And I started it like at 7, but by like 11, it is too hot to do it again.
Well, I would suggest bumping it up so your second watering is no later than, say, 8:30 or 9.
Okay.
And that will give you a chance to make sure everything's working right, because you'll be awake on the second cycle. Yeah, I mean, I've done that occasionally. I've forgotten that it's hot and nothing has died, but I think if you did that every day, your plants would not like you very much.
Yeah, no, it took me quite a while to discover this. And one year my tomato plants were doing just miserably. And then I discovered that the water was that hot, and I was thinking I must have been damaging them by watering when it was too hot.
Yeah, I think, and that black tubing really soaks up the heat. I think if you buried it, it might not be so bad, but you know, you're not going to do that for a vegetable garden.
Okay, well, thank you. I've enjoyed.
Yeah. Probably in the height of July and August, 8:30, 9 o'clock is probably the latest you want to go.
Thank you.
Sure. Nice to see you. Anybody else? They're a quiet bunch.
You did a great job, Roberta. I just, while people are pondering their questions, I just want to thank you so much because you've helped me. But I tell you, I get overwhelmed starting to think about setting this up, which size hose, which emitter, which this. So every time I hear you talk, I'm distilling more and more, and it's really helping me. So thank you so much.
I still owe you a home call.
Well, Wendy's
you have
here.
to think of this as like Tinker Toys. Yes, Cheryl.
It is like Tinker Toys. Yeah, I have been working on my system for a couple years, but it's like I'm still learning. I live in Ridgecrest, so we're getting ready for a heat wave next week, which I'm not excited about. But thank you. You clarified a whole lot of things for me that will make my system better, I think. So I appreciate it.
Good. I think, you know, every year, because I have time, I do some kind of upgrade on our system that I probably don't need to do, but I've learned more, and it's like, well, why not? Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Like putting my desert garden on an automated timer on a sprinkler valve or on a valve. Because I have a timer that I can set to water once every 28 days. And it's like, well, why not? I mean, there was one year I forgot to water my desert garden I watered it in June and I watered it in August, and I totally forgot to water it in July. So now it's going to happen.
Now I'll be happy.
Yeah. So I guess I could water it every day if I wanted to, which I'm not going to do, but I have more flexibility now. So obviously I have too much time on my hands, but
we all kind of do right now. So
that's true. Yeah. We certainly do.
So, well, thank you very much.
Another hint that Barbara told me is in her house and in my house, we had the expansion joint crack thing, you know, in your driveway. And it was just big enough to take the mainline tubing and smush it in there so you could get to a spot that didn't have any irrigation on the other side of the driveway. And that was fabulous. You know, so those, you know, if you're looking to expand what your garden looks like, I mean, you look for things like that. When I went to Bishop Nursery and bought those caps for the sprinklers, the guy who was working there said, oh, I don't want you to use less water because otherwise it goes to Los Angeles. And so I sweetly smiled at him and I said, oh, I'm not going to use less water. I'm just going to spread it out over a bigger area and make it more efficient. But I'm going to use the same amount of water, I promise. Although, you know, I wasn't. But I mean, that's the other advantage is you can water a bigger area with less water because it is more efficient. Let's see. So did everybody understand how to put the big tubing on the Easy Lock fittings? Do you want me to show you that? Okay, so this is a triple one, and actually, see this totally unscrews off. I shouldn't have done that.
Roberta, you're probably gonna have to hold it either right in front of you or turn off your background because it doesn't like the piping.
You should put it right in front of you.
If you hold it right in front of you, it should
right
show.
Here.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So this screws back and forth. So I screw it all the way to the center, and here's my big tubing, and you just rock it on.
Roberta, can you pull it up? Just, yeah. Thanks.
And you just rock it on. And usually when the end of the tubing gets to the start of the turny part, that's about far enough. And then you screw it on, and then it's tightened. So, oh, the other thing I forgot to tell you is when you're working with the mainline tubing, it's nice to take it out and lay it in the sun about a half hour or so before you want to use it, and straighten it out, because it's cold and it will retain that curl and it won't be straight. So you unroll it and straighten it out, and weigh it down at both ends and let it warm up. And if you're having trouble with any of the tubing, punching the holes or things like that, it helps to have it be warm. And if you're working in the winter and you can't get it warm, pour some hot water over it. And that helps a lot. Any other questions? Yes, Wendy. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah,
There we go.
well, for somebody who's a newbie and hasn't done anything with this yet,
Okay.
is there a way that I could get a copy of your notes from your screen, just so I could review them, since a lot of it is complete new vocabulary for me?
Can you do that, Marie?
Yes, and we did record this whole workshop, and that will be made available. And if you're okay with it, Roberta, I can send
Sure.
out your slides.
Sure.
Thank you. I appreciate
And
that.
Sarah, are you here in Bishop or?
No, actually, I'm way down south. I'm by the beach, actually.
Oh, okay.
But we are planning on putting in a drip system. So for me, I'm sure we're going to probably get some help, unlike you doing it all by yourself. But I plan on having to do my own repairs. So I will still need, and I would just like to know about it. I'd like to know what these, how you do this and how it works. So.
Well, I strongly recommend getting the DripWorks catalog, because it's
Okay.
they have everything in that catalog. And you can see, and if you're in Southern California, you probably have more shopping options.
Right.
But there's so much you can do with drip. And the hardest part, I think, is just getting it hooked up to the water. And after that, it's easy.
Right.
Yes, Lorraine.
I had somebody else put in part of my drip system.
Uh-huh.
I just trusted them to just do it right. That was Bishop Nursery. And I found they put these little tiny tubes on the part of the pipe that was underground that you couldn't move to anywhere, because they put such a short, little tube on it. And plus they didn't really put things just where I wanted. And so I would recommend to her to carefully think out her garden and make sure that people doing the work for her put things where she really wants them.
Well, I have a solution for you, Lorraine. If you have tubing that isn't long enough, you get another one of the little connectors that you usually put the tubing on and punch into the mainline tubing, and you put more spaghetti tubing on it, and you just make it longer. And yeah. I mean, and I do that all the time. Sometimes plants grow, or sometimes I take a plant out and I put another one in and it's 6 inches over and the tubing's not long enough. I do that rather than replace the whole thing.
Yeah, it's wonderful that it's so flexible to do that. Some of the old pipe that I have seems too stiff to poke a new hole in it. When the pipes are really old, like 10 years old, are they too old to add another hole?
Not if it's in good shape. I just added spaghetti tubing to our mainline tubing that runs around our property line that's been there longer than I've been in this house, and we've been here 15 years. I think sometimes when you think it's too stiff, it's cold. So
Yeah.
pour some hot water on it, or let it do it in the afternoon when it's been in the sun for a while. And sometimes if it's too smushy, it's hard to do too. So there's that happy medium somewhere.
Happy medium. Great. Well, thank you for the
But a little bucket of hot water helps a lot if you're having trouble because it's cold.
Can I make a suggestion? What? When people design their system, they shouldn't just design for the garden they have right now.
Nobody can hear you.
When you design your
saying
system,
something.
you shouldn't just design for the garden that you have right now, because that garden's going to change over time and plants are going to come and go. So you need to design for flexibility and access. So you need to have the ability to get access to the pipe or to the main tubing so that you can connect to it. So that's a really important thing to bear in mind. If we had done that better sooner, we would have had to do a lot less digging to get back into the system to add something to it or to move it around. So part of the key is to remember that your garden evolves over time. Our garden doesn't look anything like it looked 5 years ago. It'll look completely different 5 years from now. But we've tried to make sure that we can get to stuff so that we can add and subtract the tubing or whatever we need to do. So that's another part of your design, is not just to say this is going to be static, it'll never be different, but to make sure you can get to it to make your additions.
Yeah, I mean, when I'm adding new tubing, mainline tubing somewhere, I always add an extra 1.5 feet. I mean, it's cheap. And, you know, I'm looking down the road, oh, I might want to water over here. So, and we have mainline tubing going along the back of our property line because the original owners planted a windbreak of trees. And now I'm planting trees 10 feet in, 15 feet in from that line. And I'm punching holes in it and running micro tubing that I've inserted in old hose tubing. And now I have plants, you know, 15 feet in from my property line that no one imagined you would do.
And that original tube.
I see one hand up from Karen. So maybe one quick question and then we'll finish up. I just want to respect people's time. And
you had the question?
Karen, looks like.
You're muted, Karen.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah, start over.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now.
Okay, I just wondered if you know of any resources, books, or other resources to help design a drip system?
You know, I have 3 shelves of gardening books over here, and I've never found a good book to buy. I mean, the Sunset book I have, which is probably now 10 years old, wasn't very good. Some of the desert gardening books sort of touch on it, but not very much.
Roberta, would you want to send me maybe a list of if a few of these books are good? And I can
I could
forward it out if you have any favorites.
Yeah, I think truly I would recommend the DripWorks catalog. They're up in Willits. And they actually are very good at answering questions. They'll help you draw up plans. But no, there's not a good book out there that I could just say, here's everything you need to know. It is really kind of annoying. So I don't know, it's because it's so easy. Nobody thinks you need to have a book on it. Are you in Bishop? Oh, you're still muted.
No, I'm down in the Bay Area.
Oh, okay. Sometimes if you go to Home Depot or the nursery, like Rainbird makes a little book that, you know, is in a little pamphlet holder next to all their parts. So sometimes if you go shopping, you know, look for something like that. That's sort of a help. You can buy these kits if you look at the DripWorks catalog. You'll see these kits, and in the kit they'll have a booklet. But what I found on these kits is you don't need to use half the things in the kit, so you're better off buying it individually once you figure out what you want to do. But the best, you know, what I found is with today's technology, you could get a Google Earth picture of your property and maybe print it out big, and, you know, make a couple copies, or use a piece of plastic with removable ink. And then you could just sort of draw where you think, you know, you might want to run your mainline tubing and stuff. And then, you know, you sort of know where your spaghetti tubing will go to your plants, or you just want to punch directly into your mainline tubing and do it that way. And, you know where your water sources are. I mean, we sort of had it easy because our whole house was sprinklers. So except for digging out the sprinklers and making the new connections, I mean, we had all that in place. But if you get an overhead shot of your property, you can use that as a roadmap to maybe make plans. And then, because I live close in Stockton, I lived around the corner from Orchard Supply, and here I live, you know, half a mile from Big Trees. I never buy enough stuff because I know it just takes 10 minutes to go back and buy more. And if you're in a bigger city, hopefully that's the case for you. I find it hard to sort of estimate how much you need to buy, but I don't mind going back and forth. But I would recommend trying to use a Google Earth picture of your property to help you make a general plan. And then just know things are going to change as you do it. You'll get a better idea. And I'll send Marie a list of a couple of books. But yeah, there's no one how to install a drip system. It's very annoying.
That's why we love you, Roberta. We'll call you.
Well, and you know, I would, you know, you could contact your Master Gardener program where you live. Like, if you lived here, I could say, we'll make an appointment and I'll come out to your house. But I can't get to the Bay Area, and I'm probably not supposed to help the Bay Area. But, you know, that's another resource too. You know, some garden supply centers might be really helpful with that as well. But yeah, there's no.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Roberta, and thank you for everyone who joined us today.
Thank you all for coming and giving me your Saturday morning.
Thank you, Roberta. And again, Marie will send out the PowerPoint and some suggested books from Roberta, and we do have this recorded, and we'll get it up and posted, so if you want to re-listen to it another time,